This activity also invites various guest speakers who are experts in their respective fields. And this evening, we have a very special guest lecturer, Associate Professor Ken Bills from Michigan State University, or MSU, with the fascinating topic, Developing Research Ideas in Auditing. So we hope that this activity can be beneficial and fruitful for you all. Now, allow me to convey the agenda of this activity. First, we will listen to the opening speech and also the introduction of the double degree program, collaboration between University of Indonesia and MSU from the head of postgraduate program in accounting, Ms. Desi Aderiani, PhD. And the second, we will have the presentation of this evening topics by Associate Professor Kenneth Bills, followed by the interactive discussion. And the last but not least, we will have the documentation and also the closing of the activity. Okay, without further ado, please welcome the head of postgraduate program in accounting, Ms. Desi Aderiani, PhD. Ms. Aderiani, the screen is yours.
Oke, thank you Bu Reni. Supaya lebih akrab ya kita dengan bahasa Indonesia karena ini pengenalan PPIA dan double degree ya. Oke, selamat malam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, teman-teman semua ya atas kehadirannya. Sebelum kita mulai acara tentang Developing Research Ideas in Auditing bersama Associate Professor Ken Bills ya, nanti mudah-mudahan tepat jam 7 ya. Kita coba memperkenalkan dulu PPIA bagi yang belum kenal. Untuk yang sudah kenal mudah-mudahan tambah mengenal ya. Kemudian juga kita ingin memperkenalkan juga double degree program yang baru diluncurkan oleh PPIA ya dengan Michigan State University. Michigan State University ini adalah universitas tempat Associate Professor Ken Bills mengajar ya dan juga melakukan riset. Ya. Baik, izinkan saya untuk share screen. Oke. Ya. Oke, baik. Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman yang belum mengenal PPIA ya, ini program pasca sarjana ilmu akuntansi, postgraduate program in accounting ya. Kita bagian dari FEB UI dengan visi to be leading center for economics and business studies in Indonesia, which contributes to national development and is internationally acknowledged ya. Nah, berdasarkan visi ini ya, jadi kita juga sudah punya 2 akreditasi internasional dari AICSB dan AMBA International Accreditations, dan mudah-mudahan kita bisa menambah 1 lagi ya dari EQUIS sehingga akreditasi internasional terkemuka bisa lebih lengkap ya. Kemudian di PPIA kita menggabungkan accounting knowledge dan research skill, jadi ini agak unik ya dibandingkan dengan program S2 yang lain, dan kita berharap dengan ini kita bisa berkontribusi ke sains atau ilmu pengetahuan ya. And then we also have several courses ya, and then independent research, tesis dan disertasi. Kemudian kita juga melakukan training dan workshop seperti hari ini ya, kita menamakannya Bincang Akademik PPIA, dan juga kita mengembangkan communication skill, network, and collaboration. Nah, ini bagi yang tertarik dengan master program ya, ini kurikulumnya baik untuk kelas reguler maupun kelas khusus ya. Kelas khusus ini dari Kamis sampai dengan Sabtu ya. Jadi di semester 1, semester 2 kita ada beberapa mata kuliah, baik di bidang akuntansi manajemen, akuntansi keuangan, auditing, dan juga metode riset ya. Kemudian juga beberapa mata kuliah pilihan, mulai dari tata kelola, sustainability accounting, perpajakan, sampai public sector, syariah, dan accounting information system. Demikian juga untuk program S3 atau doktoral, kita juga ada mata kuliah di bidang akuntansi keuangan, akuntansi manajemen, dan juga beberapa mata kuliah pilihan ya. Hampir sama seperti tadi program S2, dan tentu tidak ketinggalan pembelajaran tentang data analysis ya, atau kita menyebutnya ekonometri atau statistik. Nah, untuk menunjang penelitian kita punya beberapa research support activities ya. Termasuk juga di sini ada Bincang Akademik PPIA yang sudah beberapa kali kita selenggarakan, termasuk hari ini ya tentang Research Ideas in Auditing. Kemudian juga ada beberapa kegiatan general lectures, Bincang Akademik PPIA, dan juga jurnal lecture dari beberapa ilmuwan terkemuka di dunia ya. Kemudian kita juga punya beberapa accounting research symposium ya, dan beberapa acara dengan beberapa universitas partner. Kemudian kita juga mengundang beberapa visiting professor ya. Tahun ini kelihatannya sudah mulai offline ya, jadi beberapa visiting professor yang kita undang akan melakukan kegiatan secara offline ya. Kemudian kita juga ada festival riset mahasiswa PPIA, tapi tahun ini kelihatannya kita akan mulai mendorong mahasiswa untuk mengikuti lomba keluar ya. Jadi tidak hanya internal, tidak lagi internal di PPIA, supaya kondisi atau situasinya menjadi lebih kompetitif ya. Nah, ini yang tahun lalu ya, ada beberapa pemenang festival riset mahasiswa PPIA, baik kompetisi 3-minute thesis, publikasi jurnal internasional, penulisan artikel ilmiah, dan juga jurnal nasional. Nah, ini beberapa pencapaian mahasiswa ya. Kami menyebutnya walaupun bukan medali misalnya ya, tetapi ini merupakan pencapaian secara internasional di jurnal-jurnal ilmiah internasional terkemuka ya, dan terindeks Scopus maupun database yang lain. Ini pada masa pandemi ya, jadi ada beberapa doctoral promotion and thesis defense which was held online. Kemudian juga we have several regular activities from forum riset ya, accounting research forum ya, kemudian konsultasi ekonometri, writing body, and publication clinics atau workshops. And then we also have several sources ya, mulai dari software, library, UE research grants, and also PPIA Datapedia. And what we want to introduce today ya, it's about joint degree program. Jadi kita punya 2 joint degree program dengan Michigan State University dan University Vrije Universiteit ya di Amsterdam, Belanda. Jadi khusus untuk master program joint degree dengan Michigan State University, you can see from the brochure ya, which I believe has been distributed in the chat ya. Mas Heri tolong didistribusikan ya. Jadi ini untuk requirements-nya, ini untuk S2, minimum GPA of 3.5, kemudian minimum English proficiency, and then also all other MSU admission requirements ya. Kelihatannya kalau misalnya prestasi akademik mahasiswa sangat bagus ya, maka ada kemungkinan tidak memerlukan skor GMAT ya, seperti yang biasa diminta kalau kita admission ke university di US. And you can also see the curriculum ya, jadi ada beberapa mata kuliah taxation concentration misalnya, jadi semester pertama di UI, kemudian second semester at MSU, kemudian third semester juga di MSU, kemudian kembali lagi ke UI ya untuk menulis tesis ya. Nah, jadi ini untuk konsentrasi perpajakan, sedangkan ini untuk konsentrasi public and corporate accounting ya. Jadi kita bisa lihat di sini sama, first semester di UI, kemudian second semester and third semester at MSU, and fourth semester kembali lagi ke UI ya. Oke, kemudian juga ada information system concentration. I think this will become the hit ya, karena information system sangat diperlukan di era sekarang ya. Kemudian ya nanti juga Mas Heri bisa bagikan ya untuk brosur yang sudah dibagikan langsung dari MSU ya, Master of Science in Accounting, and you can see several academic profile ya untuk graduate, jadi profil lulusan. Kemudian juga ada beberapa informasi ya, ada 30 kredit, kemudian juga lamanya 12 bulan sampai dengan 24 bulan, tapi khusus dengan kerjasama dengan UI tadi, maka bisa ditempuh dalam waktu 1 tahun ya. And also we have several, we also have the other master joint degree program with Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, Belanda. Nanti juga bisa dilihat ya untuk requirements-nya apa saja. Kemudian kurikulumnya ini ada, ini agak unik ya, it is quite different with MSU. Jadi di semester 1 dan 2 di UI, kemudian semester 3 dan 4 nanti di Free University ya. Jadi ini untuk yang di Free University nanti langsung mengerjakan tesisnya ya under the supervision of Free University supervisor ya. Jadi itu untuk program joint degree program ya. Kemudian kita juga ada credit earning program. Jadi ini merupakan program untuk mengambil SKS ya dari 4 mata kuliah, dan kalau diterima di S2 dan S3 maka 4 mata kuliah tersebut bisa ditransfer nilainya ya, sehingga tidak perlu mengambil lagi di program S2 dan S3 ya. Kemudian scholarships ya silakan dieksplor ya, ada dari LPDP dan mungkin juga dari sumber yang lain. Dan kami harapkan silaturahim kita tidak berhenti sampai di sini ya. Jadi silahkan nanti kita terkoneksi di YouTube ya PPIA FEB UI, kemudian juga di Facebook maupun Instagram ya. Jadi silahkan, dan juga di LinkedIn ya. Silahkan temukan kami ya PPIA FEB UI, and hope that we can stay connected. Okay, that's all. Thank you Ibu Reni. Atau mungkin ada pertanyaan dulu sebelum kita mulai dengan our workshops on developing research ideas. Hello Ken, nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, as I said, Ken is already here. Mungkin sudah mudah-mudahan jelas ya tadi penjelasannya. It's over to you ya Bu Reni. Thank you very much.
Okay,
All right,
thank you for your presentation, Ms. Adriani. So PPIA has a very interesting double degree program. So hopefully this program can add to the knowledge and experience of a student at leading institution in the world. So for those who are interested, you can contact the PPIA administration section or access the PPIA website to obtain more complete information. Okay, now so we will move to the main event of this evening activity, which is the presentation and also the discussion developing research ideas in auditing. So we hope that this activity can be interactive. The participant can write question or comment in the chat box. You can write in English or Bahasa and we will translate it for Prof. Kat. Or you can also raise your hand at the end of this presentation to be able to ask directly to Prof. Kat. Okay, so before I invite our guest lecturer, I will first read his curriculum vitae. Okay, so Prof. Ken Bills got his Master of Accountancy from Southern Utah University in 2006 and his PhD in Accounting from University of Oklahoma in 2012. He also holds Certified Public Accountant or CPA, and his current academic position now is as Associate Professor of Accounting in Michigan State University since 2019. Besides pursuing his career as a lecturer in 2006 until 2008, he also has experience work as a senior auditor at Tanner LC, one of the premier public accounting firms in Salt Lake City. His research is focused in the area of auditing using primarily the archival method and secondarily field study methods. So his topic of interest including auditor competencies, small audit firms, audit regulation, and accounting associations and network. Okay, so I will, if I read his publicity, he published so many papers in many leading journals. Okay, I just want to mention a couple of his recent publication. First is the impact of benefit plan audits on the financial statement audit, published in Accounting Horizons, Accounting Firm Association, and Audit Firm Growth, published in Auditing, a journal of practice and theory, and then collaborating with competitors. How do small firm accounting associations and network successfully manage competitive tensions? And this paper is published in Contemporary Accounting Research. Okay, so now please welcome Associate Professor Kenneth Bills. Good morning, US time, Prof. Ken. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. It's nice to have you here with us today.
Appreciate it. So happy to be able to talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about, accounting research and specifically auditing research.
Okay.
I hope what I prepared today is what you were looking for, but let me go ahead and share my screen here.
Okay, so I'm really waiting to listen to your presentation because my research proposal also in the auditing field, and I believe many of our colleagues also have research interest in auditing. Okay, so the screen is yours, Prof. Ken, please.
Fantastic. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes,
All right. And let me see. Let me change my, I'm going to change my view because I can't see any of you right now. And let me change it up. All right. Well, I might, for whatever reason, I'm not able to see you guys while I'm doing this. So if you could just chime in when someone has a question, and I'll go ahead and answer. So today I'm talking about developing research ideas in auditing. So my background was kind of given. I started at Southern Utah University, a small school in Utah, and I did have public accounting experience, and it was particularly for a smaller firm. So not one of the big four, but it was the largest local firm in our state, but only had a single office. I did my PhD at University of Oklahoma, started my career in academia at Colorado State University, kind of a balanced school between teaching and research. Found some success in research and ended up going to University of Arkansas. And there was a really good group of audit researchers there that were great to work with. I learned a lot there and recently had an opportunity to come and teach at Michigan State University. So I've been here for 4 years now. So as I talked about developing research ideas in auditing, there are 5 primary key themes that I had. And I'll talk about these each individually as we go along. So the first is using your experience and institutional knowledge. The second is reading broadly. The third is identifying extensions. The fourth is looking for things that don't make sense or paradoxes. And the last is looking at regulatory issues. So this first point, I think, is really important, using your experience and institutional knowledge to develop research ideas. A lot of people who do audit research have some experience with working in auditing. It tends to be a bit harder to teach without that, similar with tax. But drawing from that experience can lead to some really good research questions, research areas. And especially those of you who have recent experience working in public accounting, you have a competitive advantage. My experience is stale. It's been about 14 years since I was in practice now. Those of you who have recent experience working in public accounting, you know what's important. You know some of the things that are current events, the important things that you've been dealing with recently. Those of us who are outside of that for a while, we try and keep abreast of what's going on, but we have to talk to other people and it's secondhand. So again, you have a real advantage in knowing what's important. So think about those things. What's important to the profession? What are significant issues that your clients have been dealing with? What are major obstacles or challenges that you saw in the profession, either to the audit firm or the clients that you were dealing with were having to deal with?
I'm sorry, Ken.
Yes.
But the slide is not moving in my screen.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh,
Let me see.
Yes, now it is
It's
moving.
the way that I shared my screen. Let me try and share my screen a different way. If I share that screen there, can you see the slides right now?
Yes, I can.
And if I, nope. Are they moving now?
Yes.
Yes.
They're moving now?
Okay.
Okay. Technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Let me see still. I'm still not able to see you. And I don't know if I'm doing something wrong.
No, that's usually happen when we share the slides, when we share.
That happens with you too?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and pull this back up.
Okay, let me, I will tell you if something going on or participant raised question.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. Some other things to think about. What kept your partners up at night? If there were significant issues that they were having to deal with, things that were causing them a lot of heartache, those are also really good areas to think about for research, right? Because the answers to those are going to have direct implication for practice. And, I think us as academics, we care a lot about what's important to practice. So it's interesting to researchers. It's typically interesting to regulators as well. Also think about things that may have kept you from doing your best work when you were working in public accounting. If there are areas that you thought a lot about why things were done a certain way, or things that you felt could have been done better, those can also be really interesting areas to explore some research questions. And then also drawing from any questions that you have from practice, things that you wondered about. Those are also areas to really think deeply about. Now, as you find areas that haven't been studied or have been just understudied, perhaps, you do need to think about why haven't those areas or ideas been explored. If it's that others lack the institutional knowledge in that area, they just haven't thought about it, don't know about it, those are great areas to push to identify good research ideas. Because if you have experience in an area that is important, relevant to the profession, but others don't know about it because they just lack the experience, teaching them about those things, they're going to be interested, right? We're generally curious researchers. And so when we see things we hadn't heard about that are important to the profession, we go, how come I didn't know about this? This is really interesting. If they haven't been explored because of a lack of data, that presents its own challenges, right? If there's data limitations, then we can't address the questions. But if you can identify data, a data set that can be used to address those questions, then you've got an advantage as well. You're able to address an interesting question with some new data that other people don't have or don't know about. That's a promising area. Often that data is drawn from international data. So there may be data sets that you have in Indonesia that we don't have in the United States. Information that's disclosed, or a different regulatory environment that allows for certain data, that can lead to questions that can be answered that we can't do using US data. And there's a lot of accounting studies that are published using international data that can address questions that we can't address in the US because there's a lack of data. So that's a very promising area. It may also be that an area isn't explored because to explore it, there's a limited contribution. And that might be the case. But I always take some time to question whether it's reviewer 2 saying that it's not interesting, or whether it's a legitimate comment. So I don't know if you've ever seen any memes about reviewer 2, but when we submit our work, we typically have 2 reviewers. Very often we've got a first reviewer like this one here that is helpful. They might give some comments that are tough, but they're generally trying to help the paper along. And then we've got reviewer 2 who hits us in the face with a 2x4, right? That they might be condescending, or just not like anything, or can't see the value in what you're doing, and are sometimes overly harsh. So, we've got reviewer 2 here, and our young, hardworking researcher being eaten alive. Here we've got a picture of reviewer 2's, a snapshot of their review history. So completed, reject, and completed, reject, right? And they don't seem to like anything. So there are tough reviewers out there, and there are sometimes we get reviews back that just don't make sense, right? Like, you can completely disagree with what they're saying, or they give comments that you feel like you can address them all, but they didn't give you a chance to. So kind of a benchmark for me. Oh, well, and another challenge is sometimes we wonder if they even read the paper at all, or is, this meme says, I don't know if reviewer 2 even read the paper or has a review generator. So we now have AI. Is the AI writing the reviews, or are they even paying attention? But the benchmark that I follow is the contribution really limited, like they may express? If I feel like I can defend why it's important, if I feel like I have strong arguments why I know this is important to the profession, I know it's going to be of interest to regulators, I know that answering this question is going to be useful overall, and I feel like I can make those arguments in a presentation, I can make those arguments in my paper, then I'm willing to move forward with the project, regardless of some reviewers that might say the contribution is more limited. And I think that that's a fair approach to take. So often reviewers get things wrong. I don't think I've had many papers that I've submitted that have gotten published that didn't get a rejection at another journal first. We have lots of rolls of the dice. You submit a paper, you might get some feedback and rejection, and you go to the next journal. And a big part of this process is persistence, right? Just being able to take those rejections, learn what you can from it, address what you can from it, and then move on. Strengthen your arguments, strengthen your reasoning, strengthen your theory, strengthen your methodology, and then move on to the next journal and the next set of reviewers. So here we've got another reviewer 2 has a Twitter page. So if you want to see some of the nice, mean things that reviewer 2 has to say, here's one meme from that. First paper rejection. This is the worst day of my life, and your PhD advisor saying the worst day of your life so far. It's just part of this. We get rejections and we pick ourselves up and we move on. I don't think I've never gotten even an R&R from JAE or JAR. I've been published in most of the other top journals, but JAE or JAR, I pay them a bunch of money, and 3 months later, I get a rejection. It's just how it's been. But again, persistence is important. So, talking about drawing on your experience and institutional knowledge. So now for me personally, how I did this. So my experience in public accounting came from a smaller firm. And that's quite a bit different than most audit researchers here in the US. Most worked for a Big Four firm. And so what I discovered was most of the research was specific about large audit firms. And there wasn't a lot of research on smaller firms. And as I talked to some audit researchers early on in my PhD program, I asked them about that. And, I said, I think there's some pretty important research questions that could be asked about the smaller firms. I was told they had firsthand or secondhand knowledge about people that had worked on small audit firm research, and they'd got comments back from presumably a reviewer 2 that said, this isn't important. One comment in particular was that the Big Four firms in the US, they audit 90% of the market capitalization of smaller firms. And so if you're only looking at 10% of the market cap of public company audits, it can't be that interesting. Like, it's just going to be a marginal paper. And I thought about that. And I decided, I think that's a bunch of baloney. I don't believe that, right? Any school that wants to say they don't think that the non-Big Four firms are important, I think they should go to their all the smaller firms that hire their students and say, we don't think you're important. And, tell them, we don't really need your donations. You're not a very important firm. I just don't believe it. I think the smaller firms are very important. Yes, they only market 10% of the market capitalization of public companies in the US, but they do audit about 40% of the public companies. So just more of them are smaller. They also audit a large percentage of not-for-profits, governmental agencies, and private companies in the US, and not to mention all the work they do internationally as well. So I didn't think I'd have much of a problem arguing why the smaller firms are important, because they are. They're very important to the US economy and the world economy, and play a very important part. They employ, about half of the people working in public accounting work for smaller firms and not the big four. So I did feel like they are important. Another thing that I drew from my experience was Tanner, a smaller firm, was part of a larger network called Lineal Global. Back when I was at the firm, it was called the PKF network, but there are different accounting associations that they're a part of. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of what those are here in just a minute. But that was a resource that I knew that they had, and I saw that there wasn't a lot of research in that area. Another thing that I drew from my experience was working for a smaller firm. I saw a lot of different types of clients. Oh, sorry, was there a question? No, okay. I saw a lot of different types of clients rather than, the big four. They often focus on primarily one client or just a handful of clients. I saw over 2.5 years, 40 different clients, including several benefit plan audits. And so that was a little bit different exposure than other people had. I had some institutional knowledge there that many others didn't. And so that eventually got leveraged into some research as well. So again, as I said, I found that smaller firms, research on them seemed to be underexplored. Reviewer 2 said they weren't important, but I thought that they were, and I thought I could make convincing arguments about why they were. And others lacked institutional knowledge. So that was a promising area to identify research ideas. And I still feel like it is. I think there's a lot of good research ideas related to small firms that are out there that haven't been addressed yet. So one of the things I thought about with small firms is that they face significant challenges that are unique to smaller firms that the big four firms don't face. They lack resources that the big four have. They face a significant amount of competition, not just competing with the big four for public company audits, which is a big challenge, but also competing amongst each other. They lack brand recognition, and so that can make it challenging to differentiate from being seen just as a commodity audit. If you're not a big four firm, then you're just one of many smaller firms without a brand. And those who do develop brands, those brands are typically localized. So for example, I worked for Tanner, and I'm certain that none of you have ever heard of Tanner. I'd be shocked if you have. We had a single office in Salt Lake City. Within the state of Utah, it had a good brand recognition. We were the largest of the local firms that were there. So we had that recognition, and we were able to serve a handful of public companies that otherwise might have chosen a larger firm. But outside of Utah, very few people have heard about them. And that's a typical challenge that small firms face. So a couple questions there are, what are the implications of these challenges, and how do they overcome them? So the first study that I did with small accounting firms addressed the idea of, do the small accounting firms matter? Like, do they matter to the broad audit market? Do they matter to companies that serve large public accounting or large public companies? And my argument was, well, other people argued that the large audit firm market and the small audit firm market were distinct markets, right? They service a different group. I argued that they had some significant overlap, that the small audit firm market served some of the clients that were served by the large audit firm market. There were, yes, some clients that are so large that the small audit firms didn't service them. They just didn't have the capacity to, but there is a significant amount of overlap. So to address this question, there's a really interesting study done by Newman and Wilkins in 2012, where they look at spatial distance between the large firms. So spatial distance literature argues that as competitors get closer in space to one another, that competition increases. So you can think about two gas stations or petrol stations that if they're across town from one another, there's a little bit of competition there. But if they're across the street from one another, the competition significantly increases, right? They have to, decrease their prices to compete with one another. And Newman and Wilkins, they argued that industry market share is one product space that the audit firms compete in. And so as the large audit firms get closer to one another in terms of their industry market share, that the competition increases and the fees that they charge are affected. The fees go down. And so my research question was, well, what about the small audit firms? How do they impact this spatial distance? And what I found was that as the small audit firm gets closer to the larger audit firm in terms of their industry market share, it has two effects. First off, the large audit firm is forced to charge less because the small audit firm is seen as a viable alternative, as a competitor. And so it reduces the fees that their competing large audit firms charge. And so that provides evidence that the small audit firms significantly impact this large audit firm market. Interestingly, I also found that the small audit firm itself was able to charge higher audit fees compared to other small audit firms as its industry market share got closer to the large firm, because it began to mimic the large audit firm and look more like it. It was able to look more like a larger firm that had this broader expertise because of its similarity in market share in this industry. And so it had this differential impact. The large audit firms' fees went down while the small audit firms got closer to that charged by the larger firms. And I also found that as the spatial distance between the small audit firms got closer, that negatively impacted their audit fees, just like Newman and Wilkins found within the large audit firm market. So that was the first paper that I published, and I thought it was helpful to make these arguments. Hey, the small audit firms matter, and here's evidence that they do. Another study that I did specifically with small audit firms was one that was recently published in 2021 with Ali Zimmerman and Monica Cascioli. This was on the market premium for audit partners with Big Four experience. I really liked this paper. It was actually, for me, one of the most interesting papers that I worked on. The outlet for the journal wasn't what I had hoped for. It went all the way down to Accounting Horizons. I thought the idea was big enough for top 3 publication, but sometimes this happens that it falls down the journals, and you just kind of get some bad rolls of the dice with reviewer selections. But Perseverance did able to get it published, and I think it's a pretty interesting study. But in this study, it looks at the Big Four reputation premium. The Big Four are known for having high quality. They have competencies that are strong. They have great training. They have great resources. And this leads them to be able to charge a significant market premium. In the US, the market premium charged by the Big Four firms ranges anywhere from like 25 to 50%, depending on the sample and time period that you're looking at. So a significant fee premium compared to other smaller firms. But from my experience, I saw that there was a significant amount of market fluidity between the large firms and the smaller firms. There are Big Four auditors that go and work at the smaller firms. There are smaller firms that go and work at the Big Four firms. And interestingly, in doing this study, I didn't know the numbers were this big, but among clients served by public companies served by non-Big Four firms, about 60% of them are served by a small firm audit partner that started at the Big Four. And that's a huge number. 60% of public accounting firms in the US audited by the smaller firms have a partner that started at the Big Four. So there is significant amount of audit market fluidity. So the research question that I specifically looked at was if we've got a Big Four auditor starting out at the Big Four, moves over to a second tier firm like BDO, Crowe, Grant Thornton, or RSM, or if they move over to another smaller firm, are they able to take their reputation from that Big Four experience with them? Does it make a difference with their clients at the smaller firms? So are they able to charge a fee premium to their clients because of this Big Four experience that they have? They often advertise it saying, hey, I spent 5 years at the Big Four before coming over here, or I was partner at a Big Four firm before coming over to the smaller firm. They may sell that to their clients as part of their reputation. Does that lead to a differentiation for them? Are they able to differentiate themselves from other small audit firm partners that don't have Big Four experience and charge a premium for the work they do? And then also, I explored whether it has an impact on audit quality. And very interestingly, I found that it does. Having Big Four experience as a partner, they are able to charge a fee premium ranging from 17 to 26%, depending on how much experience they had before they left. But also very interestingly, it had no effect on audit quality whatsoever. Those partners that have Big Four experience, amongst all the different measures of audit quality that we looked into, found no evidence that they were able to charge or provide any higher audit quality than a small audit firm partner that worked their way up through the small firm and never worked at the Big Four. So those people that are paying more for that Big Four experience don't appear to be getting value for it. So I thought that was a pretty interesting result. Some other research related to small audit firms that I worked on has centered around being part of an accounting association. Okay, so like Alineo Global. So an accounting association, we've got many small local firms around the world that serve many different clients. Some of them are public, many private companies, not-for-profits, governmental agencies. Well, your local firm is kind of by itself, right? Where you've got a Big Four firm, they've got this network, they've got a national office they can draw on resources from, but the small firms can be very much by themselves and lack the resources of the Big Four firms. So many small firms have joined into accounting associations where they still maintain their independence from one another, but they join into a collaboration where they share a lot of resources. They share benchmarking information with one another. They do trainings together. So every year I would go to a week-long training somewhere in the US, Atlanta, Las Vegas, together with people at the same level as me from other firms. And we'd get top-notch training and then go back to our offices and have the local training that we would have from our own firm as well. So it added to the total knowledge that we had. I know that our partners met together with other partners from other firms. They discussed important issues, changes in regulation, changes in standards, methodologies. If they had significant issues that they were struggling to address, they might ask other firms about their approach for doing things. And they can even draw upon other managers or partners at other firms to help out with audits for their firm. So these accounting associations provide a mechanism that local firms can draw upon a broader source of resources. So one of the first questions that I addressed was, how does this impact audit quality? It was kind of a low-hanging fruit idea. But if you are a part of an accounting association, drawing upon all these resources, does that allow you to provide higher audit quality than these other local firms that don't have those resources? And we found that yes, it does. That was the case. They're able to provide higher audit quality. And we also found that this is a differentiator. It allowed them to charge higher audit fees than these other local firms that were by themselves, indicating that it was valued by those people employing these firms. Interestingly, we also did an analysis where we compared the audit quality of these small accounting firms that are part of associations to clients served by the Big Four that were of similar size. And we found that there was no difference in the measures of audit quality that we looked at. So very commonly we see in audit research that, we've got a Big Four dummy and we make arguments about the Big Four providing higher audit quality than the non-Big Four firms. But we show that amongst the smaller firms, they're not all homogeneous, that some of those smaller firms provide similar audit quality to the Big Four. And in fact, about a little over 50%, 50 to 60% of public company audits that are performed by non-Big Four firms are served by firms that are part of these accounting associations. So a large chunk of firms served by smaller firms are actually getting pretty good service. And those firms that aren't part of an accounting association, those are more suspect for having lower audit quality. Any questions so far? I can pause here for a second or keep going.
Yeah, any question maybe? Yeah, Bu Reni.
Silahkan lanjut, Bu. Please continue, Prof. Ken.
Okay, will do.
Or maybe if there are no questions, can I ask you first, Ken?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Some of our students do the audit research investigating the audit quality, and you mentioned that it quite the same, yeah, the quality of audit between the smaller firms and Big Four. Can you suggest how we can measure the audit quality? Do we have to observe the work of auditors, or having access to the audit working papers, or what? Maybe if it is smaller firms, we think that we can access their working papers, or maybe there is some confidentiality issues or something like that. Yeah.
So we typically measure audit quality using things like restatements. So if the company subsequently restated their financial statements, right? If they have significant discretionary accruals as another common measure. So we've got various measures of discretionary accruals. The audit opinions that they give. So if a company is financially constrained, whether the audit firm is more likely to give a going concern opinion when they're financially constrained is another good measure of audit quality that's used. Along with the discretionary accrual measures, in some countries, just depending on the data that is available, sometimes it's a working capital accrual measure that's used. In the US, another differentiator for audit quality among the smaller firms are PCAOB inspection reports. So if there's findings, gap or gas deficiencies in PCAOB inspection reports, that's a good measure of audit quality. That's not a good measure of audit quality for the Big Four firms because they all get comments every year, pretty much. And so it's hard to say that, this firm's worse than other firms based on their PCAOB inspections, but it is a good measure for smaller firms. Now, if you can get access to working papers, that is a fantastic measure of audit quality. Or we can draw fantastic measures of audit quality. Like, for example, if you can get information on audit adjustments that were made, that is all confidential information. We almost never see that data in the US. A few people have gotten some data, but it's been a while to look at some of those working papers. So if you in Indonesia have access to working papers that you can look at, that would be an amazing source of data to address a lot of research questions that we can't address because we don't have that.
Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay. So this is a question from the participant. Do you want to answer it now, Ken, or should we wait until the presentation over?
Either way, I'm happy to answer them, or I can keep going, whichever you prefer. I've got probably another 15 minutes of presentation, so I can finish that up and then answer questions, or
Yes, I'll keep the question for you. Okay.
okay,
So maybe you can, yes.
I'll go ahead and finish up. Can you see my screen right now? Am I sharing?
Not right now.
Not sharing.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me. Huh. Where is the Zoom meeting? It's hiding somewhere.
Okay. Or I can share screen for you if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm not sure where my.
Okay.
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 Am I sharing now?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. This one? Yes.
Okay. Now you can see what I've got. All righty. Oh, you're back
Yes.
a few.
Okay. You can just say next.
Yeah, I'm changing my screen, but it's not changing there. Let me hit, okay, let me try this. Share screen.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. Advance forward a little bit. All right, so I've done several other studies with this accounting association network research. That's, I guess, one of the areas that I'm known for. And the last two studies that I did on accounting association networks, or two of the last, I guess this was the last one, were actually field studies. So with field studies, I went out and talked to practitioners and did some interview-based research. When I started that project, it was kind of unique because field studies had a hard time getting published. But for me, I just felt like, when I did this first study on accounting associations, there were a lot of questions that were unanswered, specifically how were firms using their associations? And we made some inferences about that. I drew upon my own experience, but there are 45 of these accounting associations in the US, and how all of them are using these associations was kind of a black box. And I thought that it's really important for us as instructors, as researchers, to understand how they're being used. And so fortunately, I was able to get Christy Hain on, who's been trained in field study research, and Sarah Stein, who's an excellent co-author of mine. And we went out and we talked to over 40 partners about how they use their associations. We interpreted the data that we got through theory, and we were able to get that paper published in the Accounting Review. And that was the first interview-based field study to be published in a top 3 journal for like 30 years. I think that they were willing, but they needed research that had a big contribution and was done well. And I think we helped set the standard there. And since then, there have been a handful of other interview-based field studies published there. There's been a whole bunch more people doing field research because now they see it can be published. And I think that's a big boon, because I think field research is really informative, really interesting. This last paper, it addressed what we saw as an interesting phenomenon in these accounting associations. So you're part of this larger accounting association, but your firm also maintains its independence. So you're going to training with firms that, you're there, you're collaborating with, you're discussing benchmarking information and other things, but at the same time, you may compete directly with them. You might bid on the same clients that you're trying to win. So there's this paradox of balancing cooperation and competition. That's called a coopetition paradox. that we thought was really interesting. And so we explored the nuances of this co-opetition, and also, through looking at research on co-opetition and these interorganizational relationships with competitors, most of those end up failing. They might last a couple of years, and after that, they kind of fall apart because these pressures that come about because of the competition involved just cause them to dissolve. But the accounting association networks, they actually have a lot of staying power. Many of them have been around for decades, and really none of them have completely failed. Some of them have made some modifications. They've had, some carve-outs where a handful of firms left and started a new association. But for the most part, they've lasted really well. So what are they doing differently? What are the things that they're doing that help keep this association together? And so we explored that and wrote a paper on it. So drawing upon your experience can help lead to some good research ideas. Reading broadly outside of accounting can also help develop ideas. Reading the popular press, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, local financial news, all those things can be helpful. Also, reading business books can be helpful. This book here, I know it's translated in many different languages. It's been very well known, well published. It's called The Goal. Eli Goldratt, he was an Israeli consultant. This book I read in my undergraduate accounting operations management course, actually. And some of the things it talked about were organizational constraints like bottlenecks, and focusing on improving bottlenecks. Reducing bottlenecks can help create more throughput through your organization, sell more product, get more work done so that your firm can make more money. And so as I went into doing accounting research, I started thinking about, well, an audit firm is a business, and they face a lot of these same business challenges that other organizations face. And so I started to think about an audit firm as a firm that has bottlenecks and has constraints, and what are those and what are the implications? And so that actually led to my dissertation, a book I read in my undergraduate class, thinking about what are the constraints that a firm faces. And one of those is if they have a significant amount of growth. An obvious one would be busy season versus non-busy season, but someone had already published a paper on that. So another area was if a firm brings on a whole bunch of new work in one year, that can constrain their time, right? It takes time to hire people to be able to manage that increase. And so in doing that research, I found that in years that a firm has a significant growth in the work that they do, audit quality went down in the short term. And then over time, it rebounded as they're able to address that constraint. Other areas to draw from: behavioral research has so much theory out there that can be drawn from to do archival research with. The finance literature, often, finance comes out with theories and then trickle down a few years, then accountants grab onto it and do accounting research on that finance theory. So reading finance literature and identifying data sets that they're using that are new, or theories that they're using that are new, or new dependent variables that they're using, and then applying those into accounting is a promising path to follow. Economics literature and many of their subdisciplines, labor economics, industrial organization, reading their research and seeing, how can I apply this to auditing or accounting? And then management literature has a lot of theory and great resources there. And that has been an area for me, the management literature, that I've drawn a lot from for my own research. This idea of capacity constraints comes from the management literature. Competition, spatial competition, strategic alliances, co-opetition paradox, all that comes from the management literature. And CEO succession planning. I have a study on how CEO succession planning, whether a firm has succession planning or not, impacts an auditor's assessment of financial reporting risk. A third piece of advice I have for developing research ideas is identifying extensions to research read or at workshops or conferences attended. So I would strongly encourage you to practice generating research ideas at every conference you go to. You go to a conference, you hear about research, being done, write it down, get a notebook. So in my first year of my PhD program, I got a notebook, and I'd go to a conference and I'd listen to a paper and I'd try and jot down a potential research idea or an interesting maybe variable that they were using that I might be able to find an idea around. But man, within a couple of years, I had my first book completely full, and I still sometimes go back and reference those notes that I had. I went back several years ago and looked at that notebook, and that notebook I started in my PhD program, I filled up in the first couple of years. I had 4 research projects that started with ideas that I wrote in that notebook. I found over time, as you read a paper, try writing a research idea. Going to a conference, write down research ideas. Over time, I found I would go to a conference and I could listen to papers presented, and I could come home with 3 or 4 potential research ideas that I could explore. And that didn't happen immediately, but it happened with that practice of doing it. So I strongly encourage you, get a notebook, practice forcing yourself to think about research ideas as you listen to paper presentations, as you read through paper, and you will develop that ability to think about good ideas. Some of the ideas will be terrible, and that's okay. It's just part of the process. Fourth piece of advice I have for developing research ideas: look for things that don't make sense or paradoxes. So reviewer twos, small firms don't matter. To me, that was a paradox that I said, this doesn't make sense. I think there's research here. Arguments or conclusions in research that don't make sense. So some research, it's supported by significant results, but you read it and you go, I don't think that matches reality. And if you don't think it matches reality, there are probably other people who don't think it does either. So if you can, find another data set or setting that you can explore that further and find different evidence, that can be really interesting. Look for paradoxes. So a paradox that was interesting to me was this idea of coopetition in these accounting associations. Also, literature reviews can help. Defond and Zhang is a great lit review. It talks about research on audit quality, research with audit fees, lots of different things. I strongly encourage, if you haven't read that, to read that paper and get a broad sense of where audit research is. It's getting a little bit old now, but still very relevant. One of the things that pointed out for me was where it talked about audit firm competencies. It goes back to one of the first audit researcher studies that we go back to, Simunic 1980, where they talk about audit quality can be broken down into 2 parts: auditor inclined incentives and auditor competencies. A lot of research that references, why people choose a Big Four firm, they almost always reference this auditor client incentive. They've got more to lose, right? They're going to be more independent when they do the audit because they've got a broader set of clientele. But, as I thought about that, when you think about why do people go work for the Big Four firms, do they even think about that? Like, are they going, I'm going to go work for the Big Four firms because they got more to lose, so they're going to do a good job? Or they're more independent of their clients because they're larger? I don't think anybody thinks that. People go work for the Big Four because of their competencies, because of the reputation they have, because of the resources they have. And so I think that there's a lot more that can be drawn on from the auditor competency side in research. I also, Defond and Zhang also point out that we don't know a lot about how practitioners gain those competencies. Almost all the research that talks about how audit firms gain their competencies talks about industry specialization. But there's a lot of other ways that firms are gaining competencies that just haven't been addressed. So I think that is a big, broad area for doing research. And I've done some research in that area, right? Accounting associations. How do small firms gain their competencies? One of the ways is through being part of an accounting association. Big Four experience. So some of them gain some competencies by starting out a Big Four firm before moving to a smaller firm, right? Final area to look for research ideas, implications of regulation. So new regulation and what are the implications, that always will be a topic of interest to practitioners, to researchers, and to regulators as well. So a couple recent areas, PCOB inspections, critical audit matter disclosures. I've got some research in both of those areas. So I thought I'd quickly show you just one project that I've been working on related to regulation. Does PCOB emphasis on management review controls improve financial reporting decisions, evidence from goodwill impairment? This is a project I've worked on with Chris Hogan and Jen Puccia. It's got a first round revise and resubmit at the accounting review. And so the research question that we explore, does the degree of scrutiny from the PCOB on management review controls improve financial reporting decisions? And we use a setting of goodwill impairments. So management review controls are really important controls. So as part of control activities that a firm may do to try and ensure that their financial statements are free of material misstatements, they will have management review different aspects of the firm's financials. They might review over accounting estimates. They might do a review over payroll. They might do a review over expenses to make sure they seem reasonable. Well, management review controls are controls put in place over those management reviews to ensure that they occur, to ensure that the reasonableness and accuracy of those reviews is done well. So these management reviews, they can vary in frequency and scope. Very often the management reviews are broad in scope. They also consist of a large amount of management judgment and assumptions. So whether a management review was done well or not, can be fairly subjective. Whether once the management review is done, whether that led to a good conclusion, like we did the review and everything looks okay, whether that conclusion is good or not, that has a fair amount of subjectivity in it. So it's a challenging area, but the firms have been really hammered hard on this. The PCOBs hit the firms really hard over the last 10 years on management review controls. Management review controls. You've got to audit them well. Firms need to be doing them well. And that's led to a conflict. The firms get beat up, so then they go to their clients and say, you've got to improve your management reviews and your management review controls. And the firms kind of push back, like, is this even helpful? Like, we're doing so much more work now, and we don't even know if this is useful or not. Management does have incentives to delay impairment in goodwill. And so looking at management review controls over goodwill, there's a lot of tension there that if management disagrees with the work being done, they may push back and it might not have any impact on recording of goodwill impairments. So what we find, I'm jumping ahead here just to wrap up, we explore whether management review control, greater scrutiny of PCOB by the PCOB of audit firms related to their audits of management review controls over goodwill, whether it leads to a greater likelihood that the audit firm's other clients will impair their goodwill. So it's a spillover effect. Audit firm gets hammered in their PCOB inspection from the work they did on one client, saying, hey, you need to look at management review controls more closely. Do they actually do that in their subsequent audits that they do? Are they really hammering down on management review controls over goodwill, leading to a greater likelihood that the company would take an impairment of goodwill when they're expected to impair? And we find that that's the case, that the PCOB's efforts in this area are leading to positive outcomes, that the firms are more likely to pressure their clients to take a goodwill impairment when they're expected to need an impairment. We do some other additional analyses looking at whether it's just let me come down here. We look at some other areas, whether it's just management review controls that specifically took a look at goodwill, or whether any comments related to management review controls have a similar impact on goodwill impairment. And we find that even the broader discussions about management review controls that aren't specific to goodwill impairment do have an impact. All right. And the results are robust to a number of different tests. And ultimately, the study contributes in part, that area that I said has a lot of area for research. It helps us understand more about how audit firms gain their competencies, right? One area is the PCAOB says this is an important issue. You guys need to fix this. And the firms do. They learn from it and they apply it to their other clientele. So the PCAOB is informing what the firms are doing. We can't speak to whether, the cost benefit is worth it with all the PCAOB's effort and the cost to implement this, but we can speak to this focus is having a positive impact on audit quality. All right. That's what I had prepared for a presentation. Now, I'd be happy to address any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Ken. So it is very interesting that when you can find ideas that are beyond the thinking of other researchers. So, for example, that everyone thinks that the Big Four should give the better quality audit, but your research proves otherwise. And you said that so many new ideas come from outside the accounting, for example, like the management, the economics, and also the behavioral research, that it also can be done with archival method, right? Yes, and thank you. You also give us the tips to generate the research idea, like practice generating research ideas at every conference. That this is, I hope that in the future, in PPIA, we will use conference as our task including in our course, right, Bu Desi? I hope we can do that. And then practice generating research ideas from every paper that we read, and then find the paradox, and also ideas from the regulation change. So I think it is very beneficial for us to get the tips that how we can develop our research ideas and find the novelty. Okay, thank you, Ken.
You're very
So
welcome.
we have the question from, again, the first is from Miss Yayu Putri Senjani from University Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta. So she has two questions. I will read it for you. So the first is why there are only two kinds to division of audit from, like the Big Four and versus non-Big Four, because as you know, we have the Big Five until like 10 big firm. Maybe the quality is also good, but why in the so many research it is showed that audit quality by non-Big Four is like perception is perception is bad quality. So maybe this is the first question. Maybe you can ask and answer first.
And I think because it's easy in part, right? Like just to say we're going to focus on the Big Four, then it's a unifier, right? Like if you want a uniform sample and don't want to deal with any potential differences, sometimes in audit research, people will just say, we're just going to look at the Big Four here and focus on that and eliminate any non-Big Four firms. But among the non-Big Four, we definitely have, in the US, there's a second tier of firms they also have national offices. They're international firms, very large, well-respected, annually inspected firms. BDO, RSM, Grant Thornton, Crowe Horwath are all very well-known firms, and there has been some research done on them. Another study similar to the one that I did with accounting associations, one done by Corey Cassell and I think Linda Myers was on that. They show that similarly that after SOX, that there's no statistical difference in audit quality between the work being done by the Big Four or the second tier firms as well. So we see different groupings in audit research. Sometimes work will just look at the Big Four. Sometimes we'll see work with the Big Four, the second tier, and every other small firm. Sometimes we'll see annually inspected firms in the US versus everyone else. So any audit firm that has over 100 public company clients or works on more than 100 public company audits has to have an annual inspection by the PCAOB. It's a different regime. They actually have completely different audit teams at the PCOB that work with these annually inspected firms than everyone else. Everyone who doesn't meet that criteria has a triannual PCOB inspection. And so that's another split that you'll see in audit research, annually inspected firms versus non-annually inspected firms.
Okay, thank you, Ken, for the answer. And Ms. Yayu still have another question. She asked whether you agree if the audit quality is measured. So the measurement of the audit quality is using for earning management as the measurement of the audit quality, or the other fraud indicator. Because in the other hand, fraud is a management activity, not the result of audit process. So how come it is used to measure the audit quality?
So fraud. So we've got earnings management and fraud indicators, and those can be a little bit different, right? Earnings management there can be real earnings management. There can be just manipulation of numbers. Prior research has found that measures of earnings management, like discretionary accruals, are highly correlated with other measures of audit quality and financial reporting quality. So they're a proxy. They're not perfect. A benefit that they have is it gives us some variance, right? I would argue that restatements are probably the best measure of audit quality. They're the most direct, right? If a company misstated their financial statements and subsequently there was a restatement to fix it, that's a clear indicator that there was something missed, right? But it's a low frequency event, right? We see it in about 6 to 8% of observations in the US using CompuStat or Audit Analytics. But there are other firms that don't reach that level of restating that still have some manipulation of their accounting. And that's one of the things that like accruals measures can get, is at that gradient, right? Like a firm that is pushing things a little bit more than another firm. We see clear indications of benchmark manipulations. I actually really like benchmark manipulations as a measure of audit quality as well. So just meeting or beating an analyst forecast, just having a small profit, right? Those firms that would have just missed an analyst forecast, a good percentage of them force their earnings up so that they just meet analyst forecasts. All those guys are suspect, right, as having manipulated their earnings. So I think that's why people use them. We don't have any perfect measures of audit quality. Devond and Zhang in that lit review that I referenced, they argue that research really should use multiple measures of audit quality or financial reporting quality to get a broader understanding of an issue. Not that we have to get a perfect triangulation, not that, in every measure of audit quality that we use, we need to see consistent results or the project needs to fail. Sometimes you might see it in 2, but not in a third. And that's informative, right? Just because you get a no result on one doesn't mean that you can't learn something from that, or you should try and hide it. Just show the significant results and not the one that didn't work. We can learn something by showing the results from all, and they won't always necessarily be consistent. So different measures of audit quality have their benefits. Others don't. As far as fraud is a management activity, not the result of an audit process, that's true. If it's material fraud, auditors still have a responsibility to try and identify material fraud that's occurred. So if the auditor didn't identify material fraud, we would consider that to be an audit failure.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. So no perfect measure for audit quality.
Yeah.
Okay, and we still have another question from Ms. Mersha. Okay, she asked, based on your research result on small audit firm, how is that result impact accounting student motivation to work in small audit firm rather than the big 4 audit firm? Is there any difference after the result of the research tell us there's no difference between?
Absolutely none, because no student ever reads accounting research.
Okay.
PhD students do, but they're not going to work into public accounting. No, I don't think that any of the research that I've done on small accounting firms has had an impact on where people go to work. But I do feel like, yeah, that's a university by university kind of environment. Each university kind of has its own environment that's faculty have some sway on, but a lot of it is just cultural norms, right? Like kind of feel like you need to go to the best or you're not the best. And if the big four are the best, that's where you have to go, or you're not disclosing your quality, right? So that those things have the broadest impact on where people go. Even if the smaller firms are able to provide high audit quality, even if we can show all the evidence that we want to, we can show that some of them have great resources that are comparable to the big four, even then people will go for a prestige effect that the big four have.
Okay, thank you again. So maybe in University of Indonesia, we can motivate the student to read your research, and then we can influence their motivation in the working. Okay. Okay, and the next question, it is from Gina. Okay, greetings from Jakarta. She asked that the pattern of gap between Big Four and non-Big Four is same in Indonesia too. The question that how does the result of research could to make a better and small gap between Big Four and small firm, and how should the governance in your country could solve it by the result?
So this is a big issue. There have been studies done, I know in the US back, to the 70s, every couple decades it pops up, like they'll do an analysis on this gap between the Big Four and non-Big Four firms. A big concern in the US is, right, we only have 4 Big Four firms now, and really some of the clients they serve, other people can't serve, right? So we have this market concentration that creates challenges. If we lose a firm, like when we lost Arthur Andersen, that poses some significant impacts. So there's an ACAP study done in, I think, 2006 in the United States. I can't remember what ACAP stands for right now, but they, illustrated all these issues. I think it's reading through those things and what their concerns are. If you can do research that helps address those concerns, fantastic. A broad interest. How do we solve it? I don't know. A lot of the things that the PCOB in the United States is doing to try and address quality concerns, they're really hammering the Big Four firms on, these MRCs and internal control work and other things. The firms that have an annual inspection, so right now I'm actually doing a research study we're going out and interviewing firms that are going through the PCOB remediation process that are smaller firms triannually inspected and those that are annually inspected. And there's like 6 firms that moved from triannually inspected to annually inspected because they passed that threshold of 100 clients, and talking to them about what did it take to go from an inspection every 3 years to the new inspection regime every year. And they're just like, a lot. It takes a whole lot. We had to hire a lot of people, just the infrastructure they have to put in place, changing their quality controls to be able to take the comments, address them in a timely manner. It takes a massive amount of infrastructure and cost to be able to manage that. And some of them are saying, yeah, we're considering, do we drop 5 clients to drop below the limit so we don't have to deal with this anymore? And I think that some of them, one of them said, we might do that. Let's drop down for a handful of years, build up the infrastructure needed, and then move above. And then we'll be in a better place to handle this all. So all that effort actually makes it harder for firms to compete, right? It's putting roadblocks in the place for smaller firms to grow to be able to compete with the larger firms. So yes, it's having positive implications in audit quality in some aspects, but it's also making that barrier to entry a lot harder as well. So it's tough. I don't know. I don't foresee us having any more firms. Like, we've got Big Four now, and in a couple of years, we're going to have a Big Five. I just don't foresee that happening. There's not incentives for the firms to do that. And so we're going to continue with kind of some of these struggles that we have.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So maybe for Ms. Gina, this is also the interesting research idea, how the cost and benefit of the governance and impact in the result of the research. Okay, okay, so
Absolutely.
okay, so there is another question from Mr. Tumpal Manik. He's my colleague and he is the candidate doctor. That his proposal is on the quality of the auditing. So you should be very interested in your presentation. He asked, how is the relationship between the development of the technology innovation and the audit quality? And what concept can we use from the technological innovation to measure the audit quality? Thank you.
That's a really good question. So that is an area that's in significant interest by the journals right now. And it's an area that I don't have a lot of expertise in. Measuring technology innovation. One of the PhD students that I advised, he did a study on technology innovation over time and whether that's had an impact on, and specifically, he focused on communication technology, whether, we see it over the past 20 years, this advancement in communication technology. He specifically looked at distant audits. So distant audits where the audit firm is further from its clients, like a different MSA, a different state or a different location. Historically, research has found that those audits are of lower quality. And part of the arguments for that is the communication barriers. So he looked at when those communication barriers get lessened, like, things like Zoom, we're able to communicate across the world, whether or not it gets better for those distant audits. And he found that it did. He's had a hard time getting traction with that research. It's gotten rejected at several journals, in large part because of these measurement problems, right? We've got communication technology improving at the same time that just lots of other things were changing at the same time. So one major challenge we have in research right now is the journals want good identification, right? How can you have a setting where you can identify that this is really the only thing that's changing? We can get really good identification when we do experiments, right? Because we build that into the experiment. Everything else is the same. We're just changing this one thing. We have a lot harder time doing that in the real world, where we use archival data, finding settings where this is the only thing changing and we can really isolate it, where we can have quasi-experimental settings where there was some external shock that changed something, and we can isolate and say this change was kind of exogenous. And so we can say, the decisions being made here are exogenous. And so those are some settings that we can look at things. But in the technology space, I don't know what that is. I don't have a lot of industry knowledge myself to draw from. So those that do have a huge advantage beyond me. But I would say that absolutely is an area that there's a significant amount of interest. You just have to be able to find some settings where you have some good identification, some data that can help measure some of those things. I guess part of that question is, how do you measure audit quality? I think our measurements of audit quality are pretty standard, what we typically use, but potentially I do see some potential for a new measure of audit quality that might use technology, right? The use of technology if good arguments can be made and evidence can be found that use of a specific technology is highly associated with improvements in quality, maybe that use of that technology could be used as a proxy for audit quality. But again, that kind of goes beyond what I don't know what that is.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. So, like following Mr. Tumpal's question, I just makes me curious. If we have, and I will ask the question, is it okay?
Yep.
Okay. So if we have like the good research ideas, for example, like Mr. Tumpal did, he want to like combine the technological innovation to measure audit quality, but we get quite challenging in the measurement and then maybe the theoretical framework. So how should we do? Is it like forgot this good topic idea, or what should we do? I would like to ask your opinion regarding this one.
So it really depends. Part of it depends what your research agenda is. If you are targeting the top accounting journals here in the US or Canada, the top 6 journals, Accounting Review, Contemporary Accounting Research, JAR, JAE, RAST, and AOS, then part of it depends. If it's a really good research idea, you've got great new data, you can get a little bit more away with less rigor in the empirical analysis when you bring something new to the table, right? You get a little bit of leeway. If you're using the same old data that everyone else has used, then the standard for empirical analysis in theory is sky high, right? So you'll have a hard time getting into those top journals unless you have the complete package. Good research idea with a good theoretical development, good methodology that's robust, that you can get good identification with and rule out as best as you can. We can never rule out endogeneity, but trying to rule out endogenous issues as much as we can. The bar is high. If your target is not those level of journals, they're international journals, the rigor there is significantly less, as it should be, right? I think most all papers have a home, right? It's just finding that right home, and there's different levels of journals for that purpose, right? Lower level journals will accept things that have, good idea, but maybe the methodology isn't as strong to get it into a top journal, but it's still worthy of publication. Or, the empirical analysis is good, but maybe the theoretical development has a few holes that can still have a home at a lower journal or an international journal. So it really depends on what you're targeting. But again, if you're targeting those top journals, you can get a little bit of leeway if you're bringing something novel to the table. But otherwise, the bar is pretty high. And so you do need to tackle those challenges, find ways to do it. And if you can't, then you might need to lower the tier of journal that you're targeting.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So finding the right home. So every research paper will have their own home.
Yep.
Yes, okay. Okay, so there's no other question in the chat box. So maybe the participant would like to directly ask to Prof. Ken directly. You can raise your hand and you can ask directly to Ken.
Yes, Bapak Ibu, are there any questions? Or maybe the last question, Ken? About audit rotation, do you think the topic is still worthwhile to investigate right now? Because in Indonesia, sometimes the public accounting firms just restructure or reorganize their firms, to beat the regulations. What is your opinion in this topic, in this area?
You said it was audit what?
Audit rotation, auditor rotation, and audit firms rotations. Yeah, do you think it is still worthwhile to investigate the impact on the audit quality?
So there have been quite a few studies on auditor rotation. They move from audit firm rotation to audit partner rotation, audit firm rotation. There's been a lot of research on there, and I keep on, I'll think, we've kind of learned what we can, and then there'll be another publication in that area. Just seems like every year there's a new publication that deals with auditor tenure or audit firm rotation, because they're big ideas, they're big areas. So it just depends. Like I think that there is still room for research in that area, but you have to consider all the research that's already been done in that space, and what your incremental contribution is. So I wouldn't say, we have nothing more that we can learn in this space. There may be something unique to the way things happen in Indonesia that lead to a setting that's different, that would be of interest, right? But that's where you draw from your institutional knowledge, and you say, here I can make a strong argument about why looking at this specifically in an Indonesian setting is going to be really informative beyond Indonesia, to international community.
Yeah.
You feel like you can make those strong arguments, then yeah, it's something that can be pursued.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
Yep.
Yes, Bu Ren.
Okay, thank you, Bu Desi, for the question. So I think it is quite challenging to develop the research idea, but with the practice and do a lot of reading, we can get the good research idea for our paper. Okay, and this is we have get to the end of part of our academic talk this evening. So thank you so much, Professor Ken Bills, from your time, for your sharing experience and knowledge for us. It is very beneficial for us, for the student of the PPIA, and also the other guest participant. And I would like to thank to Bu Desi also to facilitate this activity, so we can get a good knowledge this evening. Okay, and thanks to you all. Even this is already quite late in Indonesia, but the participant is really motivated to listen to the activities. Okay, Ken. Before we close the session, do you have another things that you want to share with us? The closing
no, just thank you very much for this opportunity. It's really great to speak with you and get to know you.
Okay, thank you very much.
The photo.
Yes. Okay, so
Yeah.
we would like to document this activity. So the participant, if you would like to open your cam, then we can take the picture together. Okay. Okay, we will wait for, okay. Yes, thank you for opening your camera. Okay, so we will have the photo session together. Okay, just give your best photo shoot. Okay, I will count down. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, thank you so much for your cooperation. Okay, so this is the end of our session this evening. So thank you for joining us, and please wait for the other session of the academic talk. So, and stay healthy and stay safe. Okay, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Prof.
you, Ken.
Ken.
Thank you, Prof. Ken.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Reni.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Mbak Reni.
Thank you,
Thank
Prof.
you, Bu
Ken.
Desi.
Ya, sama-sama.